and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast here from Radio 2. What do we have? Well, a concise collection this week, including a savage sparking spin, a consequential confectionery coup, a rather raucous refund, and a slightly saturated starter. Who will you forgive? Here it all comes. So let's get on with the confession here. Tonight's comes from Angie. By the way, if you have one, you can send it confessions@bbc.co.uk. Angie, thank you very much indeed. Dear Father Simon and the gathered brethren and sisterhood, after almost 25 years of keeping this terrible secret, I feel the need to ask for forgiveness of you and the nation and be absolved of the heavy burden of guilt that I have carried around all these years. In the early days of my marriage, I did the washing in the bath. I would pound a selection of garments with my feet before taking them downstairs in a bucket to our antique spin dryer in order to drain the excess water. This does feel like a confession from 1865, but it's 25 years ago. Oh. After we'd been married for a year, I decided to return to study, and the hours that I would have to devote to that meant that I could no longer carry out this tedious and laborious task. It also meant that I would no longer have the cleanest feet in the country. My husband decided it was time we got an automatic washing machine. That was very nice of him, rather than insisting that you clean the washing in the bath with your feet. So a snazzy new model was promptly ordered, delivered and duly plumbed in. On the evening in question, I came home from work excited at the prospect of being able to boil wash the tea towels without scalding my feet and take pleasure in watching them being agitated in the machine. The first thing I did when I got home was to put on a 90-degree wash, and I waited. And then I waited and I waited a little longer, but absolutely nothing happened. There was a funny buzzing sound for approximately half an hour, but no sign of any water or movement at all. I asked hubby, the sort of man who goes around switching everything off in order to fix them, if he'd done anything to the machine. He said that yes, he turned the water off at source, and wasn't that the sort of thing you did when the machine was not in use? Well, we switched the machine off, it was still buzzing, you understand, and decided to cool the whole thing down with a cold wash. As we weren't really sure how to work the new contraption, with no available instructions, we plugged it in and started to turn the function dial. At first, nothing happened, so I kept on turning it, and then, with a jolt, the machine started to spin and fill at the same time. The cold water started hitting the extremely hot machine parts, making a terrifying hissing and cracking sound. We thought it was about to blow apart. The laws of physics started to take over, and the whole machine began to buck around the kitchen. It was as though it had become possessed, with water and foam pouring out from every seam and opening. It jumped around the kitchen, cracking tiles and busting the dog bowl. All I could do was to stand and scream hysterically. Thanks, Angie. I don't think she's doing a lot for womankind in this confession. Hubby at first tried to climb on top to anchor it down, but he slipped in the soap.
That's going to work. Oh, yes. Don't worry, I'll jump on top of it. And...
he's got a bucking washing machine.
Yes,
I think that's what he said. Yes. And he jumped on it to try and anchor it down. But he slipped in the soap and was thrown to the ground anyway,
really?
hitting his head on the table.
Oh, well.
Then he simply unplugged the washing machine, and the nightmare stopped. Although he did faint momentarily and had to lie down for a bit. I reckon he was just making that bit up. Apparently it was all my fault, he told me later. Not only that, but it was also my job the next morning to contact the firm to let them know that the machine had a fault. This, in theory, was true. It didn't have a fault when it arrived, but it did have one now. The engineer was sent to have a look at it, and when he pulled out a completely burnt-out circuit board, he declared it dead, saying he'd never seen anything like it before. I looked suitably shocked, of course, deciding to keep quiet about the previous evening's disaster, the red-hot pipes, the cascading water, the billows of steam, the floods of foam, and all the hours of mopping up. He had to make 4 extra trips to and from his supplier before he came up with the right replacements to go with the circuit board. It took him all day. I gave him tea and a vast pile of biscuits, but he was still mad as hell. Anyway, Father Simon, I need forgiveness for being, shall we say, economical with the truth to the engineer, and for the possible research into the safety aspects of the model that the manufacturers probably had to carry out as a result of the catastrophic failure of our washing machine, which was, it seems to me, entirely due to the fact that they didn't read the instructions, and husband turned off the water.
Who reads the instructions, though? Who reads the instructions?
But who actually turns the water off when the washing machine is not being used?
That is odd. That is odd.
Also, I'm kind of worried the fact that she was doing the washing in the bath before husband decided they were allowed to have a washing machine. Anyway, then it went kind of crazy. What do you think?
Well, they're not the most practical couple,
Not
are they?
really,
By
no.
the sounds of it. But I think a machine should be able to withstand, being a bit hot and then having a cold wash.
It's a washing
put
machine
on.
with no water, heating up for half an hour.
Yeah,
That's not
I know,
really
but just putting cold water on some hot pipes, it shouldn't make it do
No,
that,
really,
should
really,
it? I mean,
no.
So I think it was definitely the washing machine manufacturer's fault. So you're completely forgiven.
There's a certain... The microphone. Now the microphone is broken.
I'll just adjust that
There's a
if I may,
certain-
in my favour.
There's a certain Tom and Jerry feel to this.
The whole thing, the whole evening is turning out to be like that. I blame the hubby myself, turning the water off in the first place. What a buffoon.
I think
he shouldn't
he
have
is.
done
I think
that. So I forgive Angie totally. And what about a circuit board and 4 trips? Who cares? He had tea and biscuits.
They never arrive with the right kit, though. do
No,
they?
to be fair, I always got to go somewhere. I must go and get some.
Yeah, I've got to make another trip. Just sign here. That's
It's a
whole
huge
day.
van, but nothing in it, it seems. Nothing in it.
Certainly nothing appropriate.
No.
Brother Matthew speaks.
I'm still rather taken by the fact that she was still cleaning her clothes in the bath with her feet 20 years ago. I mean, this was the 90s. This is like Britpop at its height, and you're still washing your clothes like it's Victorian England.
I know.
Unbelievable.
It is slightly strange.
I have to say I sympathise with the husband here because I turn things off all the time. I read
never
somewhere...
turned the water off.
Well, maybe not, but the definition of a dad is walking into a room, turning everything off and tutting, and that's what I do all the time. So I can absolutely empathise with that. And also, I then always, when things go wrong, try and persuade my wife to ring up the company to say this thing's gone wrong and I don't understand what's gone wrong because
What are you,
I
man
can't
or
do it.
mouse?
Well, very much
You'd have to
mouse.
wouldn't you have to turn the taps off? You'd have to turn the taps off, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would. Yeah, well, I would do that. Yeah, no problem with that. Yeah. So I am going to forgive because Angie and hubby were clear. And I'm going to forgive just because hubby decided to bock on top of his washing machine.
Yes.
He said, should we turn it off? No. What's a better idea?
Jump on
I
top.
jump on top of it. I will tame the washing machine. Now.
Tonight's comes from Sean. Thank you very much indeed for this. Simon and the Sweet and Forgiving Collective. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. My confession dates back to the early 80s when I was a young lad growing up in lovely Luton. I grew up on what is now a rather infamous estate, but back in my childhood it was a wonderful place to grow up, with lots of families and children of similar ages growing up together. This meant that I had lots of friends, of which Dan was my best mate. Dan and I would spend many a summer's day heading out in search of adventure after breakfast and not returning home till it was time for dinner. Ataris were yet to make it to the masses and send kids huddled into their bedrooms, missing out on the delights of the outside world. One of our regular haunts as kids was the local parklands. Parklands were a mixture of flat fields for football and cricket, rolling hills for flying kites and hurling boomerangs, and woods for exploring and adventure. This is all very famous 5 so far. It also had an adventure playground with a tall fort to play cowboys and Indians and a clubhouse for other sporting activities. The clubhouse also contained a tuck shop to satisfy the hungry and thirsty kids. So all in all, a heady mix to satisfy the active minds of 2 young lads. Well, it was on one of these days, while investigating a small copse of woods, that Dan and I stumbled upon a pile of black plastic sacks. What do you think, Scanner? What do you think? No, you're wrong. Being young, naive kids, we did the first thing that came to our minds and ripped open the first bag. What greeted us was a sight to behold as box upon box of cellophane-wrapped sweets fell out. There was everything that you could possibly wish for. Marathons, long before they changed to Snickers. Still wrong in my mind, says Sean. Mars bars, Aztec bars, picnics, Spangles, you name it, it was there. This is like
Yes,
this is like
this is
winning the
amazing.
Euro Millions.
Yeah.
This is if you're a kid. Bag number 2 was exactly the same, as was bag number 3. Bag numbers 4 and 5 contained sports equipment. Boring.
Yeah.
So we returned our attention to the treasure trove of sugary delights. We proceeded to do what any law-abiding 12-year-old Sunday school attending boy would do, and we picked up as much as we could, and we headed home. Upon reaching the playground near our homes, we were greeted with questions from the other kids. Blimey, where the heck did you get those then? Being the most common. Well, we stashed our cornucopia of confectionery. Very good. Under our beds and headed back to the treasure trove with a trail of kids in tow in the style of the Pied Piper. All was going swimmingly. The stash under the bed was growing nicely until Jason's mother caught him sneaking up the stairs with his contraband, refusing to believe his pleas of, "We found them in the woods." And fearing her good Catholic son had turned to a life of crime, she immediately called the police. The police duly arrived and were pointed in the direction of Dan and myself as the kingpins of this international chocolate smuggling ring. So we were bundled into the back of the panda car and we directed the police to the site of the stashed loot. It transpired that the local clubhouse that had provided us with years of fun and amusement had been burgled the previous night, and our hoard was the result of the raid. Assisting the police in their inquiries, we bundled the bags into the boot of the panda car and returned them to their rightful owners. We were greeted as heroes by the clubhouse staff for finding the stolen goods, informing the police and assisting in returning the goods to where they belonged. Our hero status was further enhanced when offered the pick of sweets as a reward. We humbly declined to take anything from our grateful admirers. So we need forgiveness, though. Here's the thing, from Jason's mother, who believed her son had turned into a petty thief. But more than that, I seek forgiveness from the staff of the clubhouse, who heaped praise and adulation on two young lads for doing the right thing, who then humbly declined the rewards which their heroic efforts had so surely deserved, when in fact the real reason we declined the reward was because we had another bag stuffed full of stuff to get us through the summer.
Oh, well done.
Tucked under the bed, stashed away behind the Lego boxes and comics. Plus, says Sean, I'd eaten so much chocolate anymore and I'd have been sick. Yours humbly are no longer chocolate-loving repentant. Lots of love, Sean. Well, there you go. So for a while it was like the Danny Boyle film Millions. Did you see that?
Yeah,
where they
yeah,
find lots of money.
yeah.
And it turns out to be sweets. But if you're 12, that's going to be the best thing that you could possibly find. They returned most of it, only because they had to, because they were caught. Let's see what Sister Rebecca says.
If you found a wallet on the street and it was full of money and you took a fiver out and then you gave the wallet back to the owner, that would be wrong, wouldn't it? So you've got to just say the fact that they took some sweets from this stash and ate them and hid them.
What would you have done when you were 12?
But I was about to say, it is on the face of it morally wrong, but anyone at that age in those circumstances would have done the same thing. So I'm really torn about this one. So can I pass?
No.
Okay.
Can you pass?
Started.
All right.
Brilliant.
I think because
Ask your guest from the OECD, see what he'd say.
would have done the same thing. I'm going to forgive.
You are going to forgive. Okay, so started off stern and then came back all compliant.
You know, here's the thing, right? If it was a wallet in the street, then you'd know that someone had lost a wallet, and therefore you should give the wallet back. But if it's a bag full of sweets, anything could have happened.
That's like saying it's okay to steal from shops, and it's not because it's not an individual.
It's in the woods. It's in the woods. Anything could have happened. Could have been the sweets were off. Could have been the sweets. They didn't want to sell sweets anymore, so they'd abandoned the sweets. Could have been any reason at all for the sweets being in the trees. So for that reason, I am definitely going to forgive, because frankly I'd have kept them. And
morals of a sewer rat.
Yes, correct. But you know, I was 12 and knew no better. But even if I wasn't 12, I'd still have kept the sweets. And also I'd have had a bit of a go at Jason's mum and getting the police involved, because but then you know it's probably right to give them back. But that said, I wouldn't have given them back. I'd have kept them all.
What a picture of indecision you are.
Yes, I'm going to say forgiven.
That was tortured.
It was, wasn't it? Somewhat.
Who knows which
All
way
over
that
the
was going to
shop.
go.
Dear, oh dear.
So you are going to forgive?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yeah. Well done.
That's very good. Lots of chatting going on between the collective. What are you trying to say, Dedalus?
Just discussing things generally, generally how marvellous the show was.
Well, yeah.
And that's funny because...
It's not funny at all. That's not funny at all.
No, that backfired.
Carry on. Keep digging, everybody.
Absolutely.
Right, who do we have here? We have James sending in tonight's confession. Thank you, James. Father Simon and the Ever Forgiving Collective, your tale of the upside-down chicken reminded me of a recent event for which I need to confess. This was the person who got very hot and bothered.
Yes, I
because
was
they
here
thought
for
being
this one.
served a rubbish chicken, but actually it was just upside down. But before they realised it was upside down, had shouted at the person who sold it to them.
Fancy giving me this
place.
chicken. Yeah.
So, James says, my 88-year-old father-in-law lives in our town. A proud and active man. He walks 3 miles a day, dresses impeccably, and looks about 15 years younger than he is. Whilst physically in incredible shape, there is one issue: he struggles with anything to do with technology. He only gave up on his 30-year-old television a few years ago after the picture turned pink and was the size of a postcard, despite its power button not working and only having 4 buttons. It was with great delight that we've all had a television. Remember that?
Oh,
It was with great delight that we threw the wretched thing into a skip. This is not my confession, but it gives you an idea of his technical prowess. Maybe he's just thrifty, I think. Being an independent man, he recently bought a new microwave on his own as the old one had stopped working. He phoned some days later, a little distressed, having paid around £100 for a new microwave, saying that it didn't fit into his kitchen and that he couldn't use it. Curious, we went to his flat to investigate. We discovered he had, in fact, bought a microwave designed for a fitted kitchen, which had a large steel surround about 6 inches deep all the way around it. If you had such a fitted kitchen, this would not be a problem, as it would just slot into the hole. However, my father-in-law did not, and he bought one to sit on his work surface. It was, therefore, sitting at a crazy angle and could clearly not be used. He was confused and upset. Looking at the microwave, I tried to see if we could remove the steel surround, but it was not feasible, so suggested taking it back to the well-known store where he had purchased it. With my wife and father-in-law in tow, I walked in carrying this hulking great microwave, slammed it down on the counter and asked politely to get a refund under the terms of their "you can bring anything back in 14 days" policy. It has to be said in that chirpy voice, by the way.
Does it?
That's the way it's written.
Do that again.
You can bring anything back in 14 days. Terms and conditions may apply.
It's uncanny, isn't it?
The spotty manager, who looked about 5 years old, looked at me, looked at the microwave and said, "Can't take it back. It's not in the original box, mate." I turned to my father-in-law, who said, "No, the driver took the box away." The manager looked resolute and went to walk away. "Hold on a minute," I'm saying. "That's not his fault." "No box, no refund," said the manager, a little tersely. I puffed out my chest, red mist descending, and in a quite loud voice on this busy Saturday morning, told the manager exactly what I thought of his returns policy, that they were taking advantage of the elderly, and how could they do this to a poor, aged man who had saved up many weeks of his pension to buy this. I admit I may have exaggerated his finances and his frailty a little, ignoring the fact that he goes rock climbing and walks more each day than I do in a week.
Good for him.
The shoppers in the store were now all watching what was going on. A small crowd had gathered. Under this verbal assault, the manager remained firm. The argument went back and forth, but the issue came down to one thing. Did the driver take away the box? "Our drivers never, ever do this," he said. Not willing to give an inch, I thundered. "Look at him. He's 88 years old and couldn't even manage to lift the box." And going up another notch, I bellowed, "Are you calling my father-in-law a liar?"
The acting in that was incredible.
Oh, that was outstanding.
That was almost as loud as you, that
Yes.
wasn't it?
I then paused for effect. The shop fell silent as all eyes turned on the manager, who had gone bright red, and clearly flustered said, "No, of course not. I'll arrange for a replacement." Well, we left the shop, new microwave in hand, and with a refund of about £50 for the difference. My father-in-law was happy, especially when we showed him how to use it. Turned the knob, it went ping, and he said, "Yeah, that's the one I wanted." It had to go ping. I had a self-satisfied glow, having righted a wrong. Until about 3 weeks later, when my father-in-law, telling us how happy he was with the outcome, he said, "You know that argument about the box?"
Oh.
"Yes, of course," I said. "That was outrageous, but we showed them how, didn't we, Dad?" "Actually," says my father-in-law, "I asked the driver to take it away. He didn't want to, but I absolutely insisted and got very cross, so he gave in eventually. Do you think that's okay?" he says. All right, Dad, yeah. I'm sure that's fine. No harm done. But anyway, I do need to seek forgiveness from the collective for ruining this manager's day when he was only doing his job, and for the driver, who almost certainly got a very large telling off. Well, I quite like doing the acting, and I quite like the
Yeah, it's
shouting.
very good, I think.
And you can understand, if you're taking in an 88-year-old man, you can win almost any argument, I would have thought. Sister Rebecca.
2 things there.
Yes.
Firstly, it's obviously the father's fault because he was the one who told the driver to take the box away and he didn't tell his son James, so James didn't know when he was shouting at the
Are
manager.
you blaming an 88-year-old man?
So James did that with a completely clear conscience, and also the father-in-law was badly advised in the first place by the person in the shop who should have told him, "This microwave you're buying is for a fitted kitchen. have you got a fitted kitchen? No, then you shouldn't buy it. So that didn't happen either. So for all those reasons, James was in the right, and I think you're forgiven.
I like the way you actually built in a sort of bit of consumer advice in there. It's almost as though kind of finance and money kind of run through the blood.
Yeah.
What do you think, Venerable Dead?
Well, I'll add a couple of reasons as well for forgiving you to those. I'll say that technically the driver did take the box away, and that's all that they said in the shop. He took it away. The driver took it away. Did he take it away? Yes, he did.
Why? Because your 88-year-old man got very cross about it.
Yeah, but you don't throw an 88-year-old man into the argument, do you, at that stage? But later on, perhaps. And then the company can stand it, if it's the company I'm thinking of. They can stand it.
Oh, right.
It's one of those catalogue places.
Yeah, exactly. They can stand it. They can stand it. The way I could tell from the way you acted it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What, you mean for a moment I looked like a 12-year-old manager from a catalogue shop?
Yeah.
Here's Brother Matthew. He's got a lot to say now.
Here we go. Far be it from me to take the contrary position here, but just because we're calling this manager 12-year-old spotty, it's the policy. It's the policy of the shop. They don't take away the boxes, and you can't just come in here with some microwave you've probably taken off the street, and we're going to give you your money back. It's just not going to happen.
It's an 88-year-old man.
And also, since when do we win arguments by bellowing, "Are you calling my 88-year-old father-in-law a liar?" That's where we are now. Thousands of years of rational thinking, and that's how we win an argument. Absolutely outrageous. No, you are not forgiven. I am entirely in the side of the 12-year-old spotty manager.
And we welcome again Novice Nige. And we try and get a culinary thing. If you have a culinary confession, the chance that's going to turn up on a Thursday.
Yes, good.
Because you have some inside knowledge in which to impart. And this one comes from Dave. Dave, thank you very much. Tonight's confession called Soups. I Did It Again. Dave says, Dear Simon and the Gathered Collective, my confession goes back to the late 80s. I just recently finished my first level City and Guilds at Catering College. And I got a position as a trainee chef in a large hotel in a city centre somewhere. This is quite a big step up from the small pub kitchen I'd been working in. I was now part of a large brigade of 25. Does this sound like a big kitchen?
Yeah, 25, pretty big. Do a lot of covers, as you're saying. Meals.
Yeah. To begin with, thank you for the clarification. To begin with, my mundane duties usually consisted of being shoved in a corner of the vegetable section, chopping onions, turning carrots, peeling potatoes, and making sure everybody was supplied with tea and coffee throughout the day. The head chef, we'll call Stew, was a huge, burly mountain of a man, whose voice boomed out around all four corners of the kitchen, barking orders out at people. I had the full force of him on a few occasions. He was not somebody to get on the wrong side of, as I discovered one Saturday night during a busy service. A customer complained about his steak, sending it back twice. Well, the chef saw red and was incensed by this. He looked like he was going to burst a blood vessel, his eyes popping out on stalks. How dare they complain? There's nothing wrong with my steak. Doesn't he know how busy we are in here? Anyway, then he proceeded to take out another steak from the fridge, took off his wooden clog and began to tenderise the steak, beating the hell out of it like a madman, before sending it back. Anyway, I digress. After I'd been working there a short while, I got elevated to the lofty position of soup maker. On the particular day in question, I had been making the soup for 200 people. As lunchtime approached, the imminent arrival of the guests, the chef boomed out from across the kitchen, "Make sure the tomato..." He's Brian Blessed. He's Brian Blessed, everyone.
Oh, excellent. Here we go.
"Make sure the tomato soup is hot and ready to go in 5 minutes.
Gordon's alive.
Make sure the tomato soup is hot and ready to go in 5... Yes, chef, I answered. Do they have to say that?
Oh, yeah, they do. Yes,
Really?
chef.
It's like being in the army.
Oh, and the rest.
A moment later, I heard him clattering around in the corner, throwing cardboard up in the air and shouting, "Has anyone seen the 4 boxes of asparagus that came in this morning for tonight's soup?" It was at this point I stopped dead in my tracks. I realised that the large pan of soup bubbling away in front of me on the stove was not tomato, it was asparagus. I'd made them the wrong way round.
What?
Yes. It was meant to be tomato soup for lunch and asparagus for dinner, but I got confused, I think because they look the same.
Do they?
What?
Really?
Really? Yeah.
Different colours?
I don't think he's still a chef.
Anyway, panic set in as I knew the chef would be over in a minute to taste the soup before it was served. And I was already in his bad books from a previous day for making a batch of sherry trifles and forgetting to put the sherry in. And for not adding any tomato paste to the pizza bases. Anyway, I had to think fast. So then I remembered that there was a large bottle of red food colouring in the pastry section. That should do the trick, I thought.
Yeah.
And proceeded to add most of the bottle and mixed it in, and to my amazement, it had completely changed colour, from green to something that at least now looked like tomato soup, but with, presumably, asparagus in. Anyway, just in the nick of time as the chef came over to check the soup, I waited with bated breath as he tasted it. I knew that if I was found out, I'd be physically ejected from the kitchen with a chef-sized boot up my bottom and a well-thrown cauliflower whizzing at my head. I know this, as I'd seen it happen before. Anyway, unbelievably, he nodded with approval, did this chef. And I began filling the terrines up from the soup was served to the guests, who were none the wiser, apart from the ones who sent it back complaining that it didn't taste of tomato.
Well,
funny that. So, Father Simon, forgiveness, please, from the guests who thought that they were eating tomato soup, which was actually asparagus with red food colouring in it. And also from the veg supplier who bought 4 boxes of asparagus and got the sharp end of the chef's tongue, as you can well imagine. So but how would, maybe it's the power of suggestion. Maybe if it's coloured red, you wouldn't think, hang on, this is tomato soup, it's asparagus, and get confused? I don't know. We'll find out what Top Chef Man thinks in just a moment. But Sister Rebecca first.
It sounds all very strange, doesn't it? How can the chef not have realised it wasn't tomato soup when he tasted it? And how can those customers who didn't send it back also not realise?
Because they're fools.
Asparagus and tomato taste nothing like each other. I think he should have just admitted his mistake and said, we'll give them all, the soup of the day is asparagus, not tomato, and you'll have tomato later. He should have just fessed up. So I think for that reason and for deceiving his customers, misleading them, you're not forgiven.
Can you imagine that, Nigel? So, it might look the same, but if it's asparagus, and if you were given red soup, would you think, I'm confused?
I think Chef Stew, his palate was blunted by years of excess or something, but, I don't know, maybe that's what happens running big brigades, that he's just lost it. But, Dave, again, sherryless trifle, no tomato paste in the lasagna. Really, I can't believe that he still is a chef. But there again, he was quite enterprising and thought, I've made a complete hoolie of it. Rather than fessing up, I'll see what I can do, and got away with it.
He was clearly terrified. If you're going to, instead of just say, look, I'm sorry I made the wrong kind of soup, he felt as though he needed to fill it full of red food colouring immediately to try and get away with it.
And it is a very terrifying prospect. Sometimes you are the lowest of the low, and you're made to feel that, and physically as well. So, Dave, you got away with it. I will actually forgive you on this occasion.
There are rules
Good luck to you.
against bullying in the workplace, so that should apply to the kitchen.
A few years back, this was, methinks, and it has changed quite a lot, thank goodness. But it still can be incredibly authoritative.
Yeah, it was the late 80s when we're talking about now.
What an interesting social experiment this was, and it plays to a prejudice that I've got about taste.
Surely not.
Yes, it does, because I wholeheartedly believe that if you were to swap the labels round on 2 bottles of wine, one cheap plonk and the other one very expensive, and then told people that it was a different bit of wine, they would think that the more expensive wine was the better wine. That's what actually is going on. That is proven by this particular confession, where people can't tell the difference between tomato and asparagus because it's coloured in a different colour. So that plays to my... Therefore, I am going to forgive. I think. Yes, I am going to forgive. Because it was very interesting. Nobody in there, and they're all eating in this very fancy restaurant, which you've already established, and can't tell the difference between the tomato and asparagus. Tells you all you need to know.
Does it?
Yeah.
Guys, this fancy restaurant, there's 200 people to start.
Yes.
And they're having soup, tomato soup to start.
Yes.
I don't think it was that fancy.
Well, that was that. We need to know your thoughts and your own private confession. We won't tell anybody. It's confessions@bbc.co.uk. More for you next week. The Weekly Mayo is available now and every Thursday.